Erebol. I breathe the clean Scottish air and walk my estate preparing. This morning I bathed before breakfast. I don't know what the temperature was, a tiny trace of Gulf Stream perhaps, but not much. One feels incredible, like an instant double whiskey but clear-headed. Perhaps a line of coke does this also. I bank stamina, ready for my first day at the Ministry of Defence. The first thing that I want to make clear is that the Friday box comes up on Thursday, right? I don't want everyone clearing their own desks at 3 p.m. on Friday, then sending it up here to sod up my weekends.
What about the weekend box, Minister?
There isn't one. I want to send 2 messages straight away, one on the importance of retaining the Armilla Patrol and the second on the nuclear store at Devonport. They don't like the Armilla patrolling the Persian Gulf. It strains resources. What are resources for fuck's sake? Extending a dump for radioactive waste that abuts an infant school is tantamount to willful sabotage. I see that everyone's career is predicated on the horrendous Soviet threat. But that's all balls. My problem is that as far as top management is concerned, I appear to be both a red agent and the man who's going to wreck their careers.
Good evening. The leaders of the party that has ruled the Soviet Union since the Bolshevik Revolution gathered in the Kremlin today to be told by President Gorbachev that in future they should compete with others for power. He told the party's Central Committee to throw away decades of political dogma.
The Soviet regime is on its knees, and the Chancellor is hoping that the so-called peace dividend is going to mean big savings as the military budget is slashed. The threat, that always slightly ludicrous term, has now become a personal one to the future of the military heavyweights.
Of our forces on the Rhine, as you can see, the distribution...
An awful lot of balls is being talked about the new scenario. I stayed quiet for most of the first half of the seminar. Then the Chancellor, who knows that I'll be able to save him money, said...
Prime Minister, could we hear on this subject from the Minister of State?
Of course.
Well, there are a number of programs that could be eliminated without any risk.
I hardly think talk of cuts would be talking.
I decided to avoid the phrase early retirement.
Do go on, Alan.
Of course, Chancellor. First of all, we need to look at the theatres of war that our armed forces may find themselves operating in, such as the deserts of the Middle East or the rainforests of, say, Honduras and other places. And also, I think we have... I laid out my stall as best I could, given my hasty preparation. And naturally, Tom tried to come back at me.
Prime Minister, if I may.
Clearly further work is needed, and I trust before...
Prime Minister, may I have your instructions to draw up a schedule of our equipment requirements in the next 5 years? It is simply not allowed to interrupt the Prime Minister when she is summing up at the conclusion of a discussion.
Yes.
It is the Defence Review, and I've got a free hand to write it.
Well done, Alan. Lay your cards right and don't shout it from the rooftops.
I was exultant when the papers on the Chequers meeting arrived. At the end of the instruction were the magic words, Minister, Defence Procurement to take the lead.
I just want to get one thing straight. I'm in charge.
Well, yes.
I've talked to her, I've talked to Charles. I'm handling this.
Of course.
If we are going to work amicably together, which I'm sure we are, then we've got to trust each other. I can't have you passing notes to the Prime Minister down the chimney. Is that clear?
Oh, absolutely, Tom.
Good. Good.
My days in the department are very full at the moment, as I covertly prepare the secret draft of the Defence Review. My Defence Review, I should say.
Minister.
The only way we can keep military clout and not go bust is to ruthlessly cut the army on the Rhine and concentrate on mobility. The real question is how effective will the armed forces be in holding the Bahrain causeway? Julian, you've been drinking.
Yes, Minister. I've had a small whiskey. Yes.
At last, I even have the upper hand over the civil service. I'm a spoil sport, really. Ministers have a huge drink allowance, and it's common practice for private office to help themselves. I never touch it. Here's to coming first. My paper is succinct and radical. I have followed two guiding principles. Keep it short and get in first. I just beat the great official departmental paper, which Tom and Quinlan have been preparing for months. Ever since that nasty shock at Chequers.
This is pretty drastic stuff. What we have got to ensure is that this does not get into the hands of the Prime Minister.
Ah.
She'd get completely the wrong end of the stick.
I find myself in a very embarrassing position.
Why?
She knows I'm writing it.
How does she know that?
Because I'm writing it at her request. But you recall the note at the Chequers meeting?
You promised you would not send her any notes without showing them to me at the same time.
I am showing it to you.
That's agreed then. We'll all keep tight hold of this until after Christmas.
Yes, I was on ultra-thin ice. I could just say that. I pretended because I hadn't handed it directly to her, but to her private secretary, Charles Powell. The breathing space didn't last 5 minutes. Charles Powell, please.
I'm just trying for you, sir. I'm afraid his line's busy.
Damn!
I rather think the cat's out of the bag, Minister. Quinlan happened to ring Charles, and
Christ, what do I do now?
I think you'll just have to go round straight away and apologize.
Impossible. Anyway, he's probably left by now.
I'll just see.
Of course, he was still there, in I'm in charge mode. And the chair stood directly in front, ready for a pre-caning homily. I really am most terribly sorry. I just couldn't own up with all those people around.
I've had a word with Charles, whom I know well. He agrees the Prime Minister should not see this paper before Christmas. Otherwise, she'll be making our lives a misery over the holiday.
It's very good of you to take this line.
No. It's just one of those things. Anyway, have a good holiday. You going skiing?
I felt a bit of a shit. But how else could I have played it? I put my all into that report. Truly, it was the apotheosis of my whole career, both as a historian and in public life. Have I overreached? Did I gallop too soon and too recklessly? It's impossibly difficult to set great reforms in train from a middle-ranking position. But I know I'm right. Always remember, at times of acute crisis in the course of human affairs, a man will emerge. If he does not, it means that the time is not yet ripe. Adolf Hitler.
1, 4, 3, 2,
New Year's Day, 1990.
It wasn't officially a hurricane, but the storm which swept the country today still claimed 34 lives and caused massive disruption. This time they had been predicted, but the gale still caused spectacular damage to vehicles and to buildings. They closed roads and railway stations and caused power cuts affecting millions.
With winds gusting to 100 miles an hour.
This is going to be my year. In fairness, I should say that I love my job, being racked only by the pains of not being Secretary of State. My present solution is to move Tom King to health, where he could be pinkly affable and repair some of the damage caused by my abrasive namesake. But that could only happen if Kenneth Clark has a nervous breakdown, which unfortunately is unlikely in one so fat. One mustn't be uncharitable, but after all, this is the roughest game at the biggest table, and I am in the ascendant.
The Prime Minister says she will stick to her chosen course and fight every inch of the way for a fourth term in number 10. She tells Conservative MPs to keep their nerve, as two new by-election opinion polls suggest Labour is at least 26 points ahead.
No government has ever been consistently behind in the polls at this level, at this stage in the electoral cycle, and gone on to win. All the indicators are bad. Inflation will still be at 8.5% in November.
Does that matter much? Well, it's 1,000,000% or whatever in Brazil. They still have taxes, delicious food. Sex doesn't stop.
Evidently, you do not appreciate the significance of the month of November.
The leadership election.
The Prime Minister made a point of telling me how much he admired your paper. Said how good it was, so full of original thought.
Really?
I imagine if Michael Heseltine was Prime Minister, he might take a very different view.
Ian Gow doesn't cut much ice any longer, and so can do little to stem the tide. The leadership is in a panic. The lady has rocky moments of self-doubt. The cabinet are all over the place. Most of them are pretty doubtful, read loathe about her, but don't know what to do. Geoffrey Howe is behaving particularly poorly, chettif and unsupportive. The government have got to find $1 billion at once to buy off the poll tax complainants. Last night, there were riots in central London. All the awful middle-class anarchist scum. Class war, random dropouts and overprivileged trouble seekers had infiltrated the march and started beating up the police.
Eggs, flour and apples were hurled at the police, who managed to hold their line for a time, but when missiles were thrown and
this is bad.
members of the crowd began to attack
Civil disorder.
batons and sticks,
People are talking openly of ditching the lady to save their skins.
Mrs Thatcher said tonight she intends to stay on as Prime Minister. I'm very happy in the business I do, she said. Earlier, the Conservative Party chairman, Kenneth Baker, dismissed the idea of a challenge to Mrs Thatcher's leadership as idle and vain speculation.
There's a wild rumour going round she may be deputised at the end of July.
Deputised?
Yes. You know, receive a deputation. Chief Whip, 22 executive, Willie, that sort of thing. Told to throw in the towel. It's contemptible. But if there isn't a marked improvement, by early to mid-October, over 100 votes may be cast against her at the leadership contest. Over 100 would mean she'd have to stand down. Do you want that last Scot? No?
As far as I can make out, practically every member of the cabinet is quietly and unattributably briefing different editors or members of the lobby about how awful she is. Heseltine is quite openly spoken about as the heir presumptive and preens himself in public. Her constituency in this place has always depended solely on her proven ability to win general elections. But now this is in real jeopardy.
Regarding the Prime Minister, do you think it's time she finally moved on?
What's more, I'm inclined to think that the party in the House has finally just got sick of her. This morning, I killed the heron. He's been raiding the moat, starting in the early hours, then getting bolder and bolder, taking 8 or 9 fish every day. He was just opposite the steps, took off clumsily, and I fired. I reloaded, went round to the opposite bank. Tom beat me to it and gamely made at him.
Out of the way, Tom!
I did not want to mutilate that beautiful head, so drew a bead on his shoulder. The execution. Sodding fish. Why should I kill this beautiful creature just for the sodding fish? I was near a nervous breakdown. Yet if it had been a burglar or a vandal, I wouldn't have given a toss. It's human beings that are the vermin. If something is happening, or has happened, that affects one adversely, is upsetting, bad news, one feels very tired over that time, even though one still doesn't know. This morning, I felt dreadful. It's not just feeling a bit sleepy. It's feeling absolutely shattered, as if one was getting polio, only without the fever.
Minister, I have some very bad news. Ian Gow has been killed by a car bomb.
How spiteful of them. I thought particularly of the poor lady, because Ian loved her, actually loved her, I mean, in every sense but the physical. And in the end, as lovers do, he got on her nerves, and she was offhand with him. Ian got me into government, surmounting much opposition, and even from her, misgiving. My closest friend, by far, in politics. Now they've got her two closest confidants, Harry and Ian. I suppose I should be apprehensive that they might come for me. But strangely, because I am in many circumstances cowardly, I'm not.
Iraqi troops have invaded Kuwait and are reported to have taken over the capital, Kuwait City. Iraq says the Kuwait government has been overthrown. The invasion follows the breakdown of talks between the two countries over oil production and territory. The White
It
House
seems
has condemned the
that
invasion
sooner than
as acts of
expected,
military
the Clark Bahrain yardstick has its credentials confirmed.
Kuwait has been invaded by Iraq, and on the line now is the Foreign Office Minister.
The Prime Minister is anxious that a Minister of State should go out to the Gulf immediately. Tom is stuck in Scotland, so the fickle finger of fate seems to be pointing at you.
Look at the fickle finger. What I want to be told is that I'm the PM's own personal choice.
Ah.
I order you to stop all arrangements concerning this proposal. I will not have Charles Powell giving orders to my department without... Hello?
BBC,
Hello?
with Peter Sissons and Andrew Hardy.
Hello?
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. Iraq's invasion of Kuwait is condemned around the world. The United Nations says withdraw your troops. But tonight, Iraq's control appears to be almost complete. It warns it will turn Kuwait into a graveyard if other countries intervene.
The sheikhs hope for assistance of a specialist kind. Each, in their different way, has asked for a strong detachment to protect them personally. Because if things really start to disintegrate, they couldn't trust even their own bodyguard. We landed at Riyadh to take on fuel. Tom has specifically barred me from going to Saudi, claiming it as his area. But the ambassador, a very good man indeed, came out to meet me.
Good morning, Minister.
The Americans are going to attack, no doubt about it. But when? There are F-16s here, wingtip to wingtip. Once military build-up passes a certain stage, battle becomes almost inevitable. It is the railway timetables of 1914 and the guns of August. Tom has given me a good talking to after my Gulf trip. Overstepping the mark again, apparently. This fucking Saddam thing has given the armed forces a renewed raison d'etre. A war to fight. Wee-hee! Buy anything, order anything. All great fun, but I sense those who are opposed to me and what I'm trying to do are in the ascendant. I am back in my kettle and have a lot of extra approving to do of emergency procurement. But I am completely excluded from policy meetings. While Saddam masses his troops, the Tory party remains intent on its petty squabbles. The lady is beleaguered. She doesn't realize what a jam she's in. It's the bunker syndrome. Everyone round you is clicking their heels. The saluting sentries have highly polished boots and beautifully creased uniforms. But out there at the front, it's all disintegrating. The backbenchers are mutinous and in flight. And in her hour of gravest need, Geoffrey Howe has decided to resign.
Received wisdom, has it? That Geoffrey's resignation will tear the whole thing wide apart.
Why? Why should it? Who gives a toss about the old dormouse?
Careless talk, Alan.
Tristan is clamming up. A bad sign. Already has gone into neutral mode. Secret policemen burning the old files, ready to serve new masters.
It's rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease only for them to find the moment the first balls are bowled that their bats have been broken before the game might have been tackled.
Good evening. Sir Geoffrey Howe's resignation from the government has triggered the Prime Minister's 8th ministerial reshuffle in just over a year. But Mrs Thatcher will not be appointing a new Deputy Prime Minister. The job will be...
He could at least have gone quietly. We must fight all the way, to the death.
This appeals to me. Leonidas at Thermopylae. But this could be the end of me. I came in with her, and if she falls, the loyal may fall with her.
The Prime Minister...
The papers are terrible, and the 5 o'clock news was even worse. The lady herself is going away, out of the country. It's absolute madness. It just makes her seem snooty and remote.
I am persuaded that I now have a better prospect than Mrs. Thatcher of leading the Conservatives to a 4th electoral victory and persuading the ultimate calamity of a Labour government.
Most people are interested not so much in the result as in knowing what the result will be in advance in order to ingratiate themselves with the new regime. As the savour of a Heseltine victory starts to pervade the crannies and cupboards and committee rooms, so more and more people are coming out against her. It wasn't until an encounter with my Finnish friends that I began to realize how bad things were getting. They were confused and asked me if there was any chance that Mrs. Thatcher might actually lose.
No, not at all. Just one of those quaint traditions we have in the Conservative Party.
But the encounter made me realize the enormity of what we're doing.
Score.
Changing the Prime Minister, but without any electoral authorities so to do. I went to see Peter Morrison, who was looking after the ladies' campaign, and found the usually buzzing corridors curiously deserted.
Alan.
I'm sorry to butt in. But really, I'm getting very worried about the way things are going.
Well, that's quite all right, old boy. Relax.
Well, I keep getting very bad reactions from people in places that I wouldn't expect it.
Look, do you think I'd be like this if I wasn't entirely confident?
What does the arithmetic look like?
It's tightish, but okay. I've got Michael on 150. Could be 124. Worst.
Peter, I don't think that people are being straight with you.
I have my ways of checking.
Paul?
I know about Paul.
The Wintertons?
The Wintertons, funnily enough, I've got down as don't knows.
What the fuck do you mean, don't know? This isn't a fucking street canvass. This is a two-horse race. Every vote counts.
Actually, I think there might be a number of abstentions.
Well, shouldn't we be out there twisting arms?
There's no point. In fact, I think it could be counterproductive. I have a theory about this. I think some people might abstain on the first ballot in order to give Margaret a fright, and then rally to her on the second.
For want of a nail, a kingdom was lost. 4 votes. That was all there was in it.
Alan? She'll wipe the floor with him next time round. The abstainers will all come in. You don't understand. All those people who wanted to give her a fright will support her now she's up against it. You'll see.
How can people get things so wrong? Perhaps there was a lot of this kind of muddle thinking around before the ballot. But that's historic. She's a loser now. Doomed. In the end, we are all sacked, and it's always awful. It is as inevitable as death following life. If you are elevated, there comes a day when you are demoted. Even prime ministers.